China's Galwan lies, hiding the People's Liberation Army's mammoth Galwan death toll has been busted yet again. An Australian report has claimed that the People's Liberation Army lost at least 9 times more soldiers than the official count of 4 in the Galwan 2020 clash. Now, according to the report, at least 38 Chinese troops perished, drowned while crossing back across the line of actual control in the fast-flowing river in the darkness and bone-chilling cold after being chased away from Galwan by Indian troops.
The face of raw courage. The unparalleled valor of the Indian Army braves pushing back Chinese soldiers transgressing in Galwan in June 2020. The unprecedented clash after Chinese deceit and treachery. But now, nearly 2 years later, an Australian paper has claimed that the Chinese army losses at this high-altitude valley in Ladakh were much higher, as much as 9 times higher than what was claimed by Beijing. The investigative report has claimed a large number of Chinese troops, as many as 38 or more, drowned crossing the Galwan River at an altitude of over 14,000 feet in Ladakh.
They've come forward and said 4 people, or they've awarded 4 people medals posthumously. But now it's emerged, this report has emerged, suggesting it's much, much higher, around 38. There are varying reports, but 38 seems to be the popular number, yes.
The report, quoting extensively from now deleted Chinese social media handles and web reports, has claimed evidence has emerged that strongly suggests there were 2 separate but similar clashes that occurred just over a week apart. The report says China's casualties extended well beyond the 4 soldiers named by Beijing.
The Chinese government has censored it, has been taking down reports from the internet and even arresting one journalist for reporting the fact that the death toll was much higher than the 4 alleged by the Chinese government.
The report claims many Chinese soldiers were killed attempting to cross back over the fast-flowing Galwan River in the early stages of June 15th and 16th battle. China confirmed that 1 soldier, Junior Sergeant Wang Zhuaran, reportedly drowned, but the remaining 3 soldiers, PLA Battalion Commander Major Chen Hongjun, Private Chen Xiangrong, and Junior Sergeant Xiao Xion, were killed by Indian forces. The Australian report claims that China tried to dismantle a temporary bridge that Indian soldiers had erected to cross a stream over the Galwan River on May the 22nd.
Why China wants to hide all this is because its propaganda amongst its own people is that China is a very powerful nation and all nations are scared of it and Chinese soldiers are invincible. In the actual fact, Chinese soldiers are conscripted. They are not voluntary like in the Indian soldiers, and we have seen videos of many soldiers crying and weeping when they were being sent to the Ladakh area in the front lines. And this is what is the fact of China.
The report goes on to say that on May the 22nd, Indian soldiers led by Colonel Santosh Babu, commanding officer of the 16th Bihar, built the temporary bridge to monitor Chinese activities. On June the 6th, Chinese soldiers tried to dismantle the bridge. 80 Chinese soldiers came, the report says, to dismantle the bridge, and 100 Indian troops were there to defend it. A decision was taken on both sides to dismantle the temporary infrastructure. While India adhered to the commitment, China did not. When Indian soldiers went to monitor developments, that's when the clash began. What the Australian report does is prove that China has hoodwinked its public, the families of its soldiers, and the world. China claimed only 4 soldiers died in the Galwan Valley, but this Australian report says it could be closer or even more than 38. Bureau Report, India Today.
So Beijing's half-truths and absolute lies stand completely exposed. Let's get you more on this big story. Joining me on India First is Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, former Ladakh Corps Commander. Remember, he's dealt with the Chumar and Depsang standoff as Corps Commander in the past. Professor Brahma Chilani keeps a hawk eye on developments in the region, especially China. Geeta Mohan is India Today's Foreign Affairs Editor. My first question is to our Executive Editor, Shiv Arur. Shiv, India knows the Chinese army fatalities, but our soldiers and government have rightfully not embarrassed Xi Jinping and China. Russia exposed China, 45 Chinese fatalities. Now, the Australian year-long investigation appears to have nailed China's lies once again, Shiv.
Well, Gaurav, China has been trying consistently for a year and a half now to mask the true extent of the damage, that was done to their army in the Galwan clash. It was India today that had reported that the Indian Army's very own, operational report at the site of the clash of that night was no less than 17 bodies that were actually identified and given back. We've written it in our in our reporting at that time as well. Since that time, there have been various different accounts. Some independent, not so independent. China has made a huge meal out of this, saying that these are all claims, there is no proof. India, being the honorable country, has not indulged in the kind of shameful, the low-down kind of propaganda that China has done over soldiers, putting out images of captives, putting out images of, of the clash and videos. India, as a country that recognizes a wartime operation with a conventional rival, has not done that because they recognize that soldiers, no matter who they are, must be respected because they've got families back home. But what this independent journalist from Australia has done now is bell the cat. He's basically told the world the truth that China has so far been dodging and saying, nobody can believe India because these are just, this is fog of war and propaganda and claims and counterclaims. He's basically used social media, deleted handles in China, the crackdown that has been conducted on them to put together a picture that is much more accurate than the one that China has been putting out. And as he said, as Anthony Clan said in his first interview to an Indian channel today, he said no less than 38 Chinese soldiers have died. And it's a sad thing. It's nothing to celebrate. It's a sad thing because China has basically hoodwinked its public, hoodwinked the families of these soldiers, and hoodwinked the world about what really happened in Galwan. And may I just end by saying, Gaurav, that by choosing a survivor of the Galwan clash to hold the torch for the Beijing Olympics, in my personal opinion, is actually a compliment to India. It's actually acknowledging what happened to them in Galwan.
Oh, absolutely. Shiv, stay with me. Let me quickly take this now to General Rakesh Sharma. General Sharma, the Australian report seems to indicate China is no different from Pakistan. Both countries, China and Pakistan, hide their fatalities. Is this a reflection of Xi Jinping's insecurities?
Thank you, Gaurav, for inviting me. And you're right, Pakistan did the same thing in Kargil war. China did the same thing in 1962. It's only after 32 odd years, in 1994, a researcher came out with a figure of 722 deaths of the Chinese soldier in 62 war. That's the social contract an authoritarian regime has with the public. They have to prove that there's invincibility of the PLA, and there is that the CCP can do no wrong. And the public has to be taken along in that, drama that the facade that they create about these deaths. So obviously, this truth would have come out one day, like it came out for the 62 war. This truth would have come out one day. And this researcher who's done this work in Australia has come out with a figure of a minimal 38. And I'm sure there may be much more than these also. And that also figure will come out, maybe 10 years, maybe in short while. I'm told there's a next report coming out of this, of Australia, and this coming Saturday. Maybe some new truths will come out on Saturday. The fact of the matter is that our troops who fought the Galwan River had openly told us privately and in public, saying that the number of deaths of the Chinese were much larger. This 4 is a facade. And 4 also, if you recollect, was told to us in February 2021, which is 8-9 months later. So, we knew that the truth this was lies. There was a truth lying somewhere far away, and the truth was being hidden from the public.
General, stay with me for a moment. Professor Chilani, Russian agency TASS had said China suffered 45 fatalities. China did not reveal the truth. The Australian paper says at least 38, indicating Chinese casualties perhaps could be even higher. Is Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Chinese army, are they above questioning?
Well, first, when the clashes happened in June 2020, US intelligence estimates, as they appear in American newspapers, put the Chinese death toll at between 35 and 38. And the Indian Northern Command chief at that time said publicly that they counted 60 stretchers that the Chinese brought to take away the dead or the injured. So the commander said that he couldn't, there was no way the Indians could know how many died, but 60 soldiers were removed on stretchers. So this figure of 38 is in line with the US intelligence estimates. But there's also an important point to keep in mind. The Chinese government has never said that only 4 died. What they did was that 8 months after the clashes, they announced posthumous awards for 4 PLA soldiers. But they have kept mum on the exact death toll. This is the same pattern that we saw. They did not reveal the death toll in the 1962 war or the 1979 invasion of Vietnam or even the Korean War. One other thing that we should keep in mind is that this Australian website, which has published this report, actually that news report is based on some report of Chinese researchers. But that website has unfortunately bought Chinese spin. It says that most of these Chinese soldiers did not die in combat. They died while retreating and they drowned. That's how they died. But that's not the reality. We know from other accounts that most of the Chinese fatalities happened in hand-to-hand combat with Indian soldiers.
Yes.
So the spin that they drowned is just nothing more than spin.
So China, okay, once again it's trying to spin. You're absolutely right, because the accounts that we have very clearly say that Indians not only pushed back the Chinese, but actually paid back with interest. Geeta, China initially kept quiet, then awarded 4 soldiers posthumously. Others were reportedly buried, we are told, in unmarked military graves. This report raises some rather uncomfortable questions for Beijing. At least 38 Chinese soldiers were either swept away or killed in combat.
Well, painstaking effort by Anthony Clam there, Gaurav, to go through all the kind of chatter, conversations on social media, online, and then come up with this number. It's quite an exact number. When we spoke to him, and India Today spoke to him, he said that it could be a few more or less, but 38 certainly is a number that he himself has counted. So a painstaking effort, a lot of answering to do by Beijing. But we know what the response really of China is going to be, that this is a Western propaganda, given the kind of relations that Australia and China really share. And that whatever these Australian reports are saying are absolute lies. But like Shiv said, Gaurav, it is not just lying to an entire nation, but it is also denying the families of these heroes or these fallen soldiers, denying them their pride, their place in public, and the respect that they should have accorded to the fallen soldiers and the families.
It just shows that there is no honor in the manner in which China deals with the situation. I mean, so like Pakistan is just so disappointing. India is flanked by such neighbors. But Jalil Sharma, China's deceit also stands completely exposed. According to this report and from information that we've been able to independently gather, they agreed to dismantling the temporary infrastructure at the LAC. India did so, PLA didn't. An indication how untrustworthy China actually is.
Yeah, so that is true. You know, if you recollect what happened those days, the bridge is a new item which has come up in this news. I'm sure we made a bridge across the river, a temporary bridge, but I have doubts if Chinese troops would have come anywhere close to the bridge to be dismantled. That may be an exaggeration of some kind. But they had a tent on top, and, you know, there was a agreement of those tent and the other infrastructure to be removed, which wasn't removed by the Chinese. And that authentication was being planned and carried out, which led to this fisticuffs and now the deaths that took place there. So, there is always half-truths and, many lies which the Chinese bring about.
Yes.
I also wish to state that there is a news item saying that the bodies are buried in Shikwane. Shikwane is, a little south of Demchok, the other side of, generally falls in line with Himachal Pradesh. They have another cemetery close to Rohtak. So, if they are buried in Shikwane, that means, the bodies were not carried across to the homes of the families. And, the families would have suffered greatly. If you see PLA soldiers comparing it with what happened to India, where the bodies were taken across to each one of these homes all over the country, and what this great ceremonial were carried out, and good due respect was given to the martyrs of that time. Look at the stark difference that takes place. And you refer to Pakistanis. They left the bodies to be buried by us in after the Kargil war. They didn't even want to own up those bodies. Look at the great difference that we have, how we treat our martyrs and how our neighbors wish to do so.
Professor Chelani, former National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon seems to be indicating the fact that China did not achieve its aim at Galwan. 2022 is a crucial year for Xi Jinping, from Beijing Winter Olympics that start tomorrow to Xi Jinping seeking a third 5-year term. Do we expect more Galwans this year, more tension along the LAC, either in Arunachal, Sikkim, middle sector or Ladakh?
We've seen China become increasingly aggressive and belligerent. We've seen the Chinese president visit the border with India. He, in fact, spent a night at a forward PLA base located just 15 kilometers from the Arunachal Pradesh border.
Yes.
There couldn't have been a more provocative visit by the Chinese president. And we have seen how in recent months they have stepped up the construction of border settlements and villages, often in disputed areas. And in the case of Bhutan, they're building them right inside internationally acknowledged Bhutanese territory. But to answer your larger question, it's clear to everybody, including the Chinese Communist Party, that Galwan Valley was not a victory for China. That's the reason why they're creating a hero out of this PLA regimental commander. A killer. That's what he is.
Yes.
He's the guy who ordered his men to ambush attack an unarmed Indian patrol.
Yes.
The Indian soldiers were unarmed. They went to negotiate. And they were ambushed and massacred. That's what led to the clashes. Now that killer commander is the heroic figure.
And that was the Olympic Games.
And tells you a lot about PLA tactics and the values of the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, absolutely. Stay with me. Of course, India has decided against attending the opening and closing ceremonies of the Winter Olympics to protest this Chinese regimental commander at Galwan being an Olympic Games torchbearer. China may claim sports should not be politicized, but Beijing is doing just that. Of course, India's public broadcaster will also not telecast the opening and closing of the Winter Olympics in China. The question is, are these steps enough?
India sends a clear message to China with a diplomatic ban on Beijing Winter Olympics. New Delhi gives a befitting response to China's mind games.
I wish to inform that our chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of India in Beijing will not be attending the opening or the closing ceremony of the Beijing 22 Winter Olympics.
India's stern stand comes after China came up with yet another dirty Galwan ploy. On Wednesday, China's state-affiliated media flaunted Qi Fabao as its torchbearer in Beijing 2022 Winter Olympic torch relay, a PLA regiment commander who sustained head injury during Galwan's skirmish with India. Slamming the move, the Ministry of External Affairs has announced that Indian diplomats will boycott the opening and closing ceremonies of the Winter Olympics.
It is indeed regrettable that the Chinese side has chosen to politicize an event like the Olympics. I wish to inform that our chargé d'affaires of the Embassy of India in Beijing will not be attending the opening or the closing ceremony of the Beijing 22 Winter Olympics?
Well, it sends clearly a message to the Chinese that they need to understand that there is a diplomatic protocol, that there is a sensitivity of your friends or partners or even your interlocutors. If you want to have good neighborly relations, if you want to have dialogue, then you have to respect the sensitivities of the country. Of course, we don't expect that from Chinese.
This is not the first time when India has strongly responded to China's propaganda machinery. Earlier, India busted China's flag hoisting in Galwan Valley claim, exposing the dragon's propaganda to fool its people with tall claims on territorial expansion.
New Delhi continues to maintain that LAC and the boundary question will have to be resolved and China will have to withdraw. Any provocation from Beijing will be met with the embarrassment that China faces with a diplomatic boycott by New Delhi that many other Western countries have already done. In New Delhi, Geeta Mohan for India Today.
But are these steps enough, or is this just an eyewash? Geeta, are these steps actually enough?
Well, these are steps that India had to take and needs to take every time China provokes India, to send out a very strong message and a signal, Gaurav, that they cannot continue doing what they're doing. Celebrate Galwan, lay claim to lands which are Indian territory, and it will be met with the kind of embarrassment that China is facing today. India is not the only country. There are many Western nations who've already put a diplomatic ban on Winter Olympics.
No, should we have sent a stronger message, Professor Brahmachalani? Last 30 seconds on the broadcast. Should we have sent a stronger message by not being in China at all for the Winter Games?
Well, we began by first endorsing the Beijing Winter Olympics, which have been dubbed the genocide games. So we took off on took the wrong step initially, and then only in response to China's action in fitting this PLA regimental commander as a hero at the Olympics did we announce that we will not attend the opening and the closing ceremony. So this is India at its reactive best. India needs to be proactive. And look at the gestures on part of India. On New Year's Day, the Indian Army leadership sent sweets to the PLA forces that are added against India.
Yes.
And the figures that came out last month on Chinese exports to India, Chinese exports last year grew by 46.2%.
Oh, absolutely.
46.2%, resulting in China's bilateral trade surplus with India, overtaking India's total defense budget. India is rewarding China's aggression.
That's a strong point you make there. India rewarding China's aggression. I've run out of time on this part of the show, but these are points to very seriously ponder for the government and for the people. How should we respond to China's aggression?